But I'd like to put across in a short while is, as Aspen said, the provocative question whether there's a future in the English language. I'd like to go back a little bit into the English of yesterday, and then English of today, and the English of tomorrow. And if I get the mechanics correct, yes. The English of yesterday is, when I say yesterday, then I'm not going back centuries. So yesterday is sort of a few years back or a few decades back. English has certainly made tremendous advances in the information technology. And in that respect, if I really do go back a few more years, then this may be something which is relevant to international languages. I'm not sure whether the original sin was the English language, but what this chap is trying to say here. But English has been around as a communication vehicle for a long time. And one can also go back a little further and then can ask the question of what was that country, the richest in the world, the largest military, and so on. And not many would say it was Great Britain. My apologies, whoever put that slide in there shouldn't have put the English flag in there. So my apologies to any Welsh people or Scottish people or other non-English people. So the question I'd like to ask, was it really the official language? And I think in that context, the answer would be yes. It was sort of an official language. Remember that abysmal failure of Esperanto when we tried to put up an international language, and it was a complete failure. So English was the official language. It has been a vehicle of communication in countries like India. India has 16 different languages amongst themselves, and although they do have a so-called official language, every time I've been in India, I was astonished to see the Indian people talk to each other in English, in Indian English, but nevertheless in English. The old English of yesterday was highly inflected, which is no longer the case. It has become more and more Pidgin English, and that's probably an inheritance we have from the former colonies. English also has a weakness in terms of the resistance to buzzwords and to phrases. Don't you dare to cry bullshit, huh? Because I've not mentioned any of those phrases or buzzwords. But it is interesting to see that English adopts very, very easily buzzwords which may come from the American side. And then they become part of the language. In other foreign languages, this is not the case. For example, in French, a new word has to go to the French Academy in order to be recognized, but not so in English. So let's look at the English of today. World languages, in terms of primary language, of sort of the mother tongue, the Chinese, especially the Mandarin, of course, is number one. It's interesting to see from those statistics that Spanish is number two in terms of primary language. So Spanish includes, of course, Latin America. When we look at language usage in total, then again it's interesting to see that Chinese is number one still in terms of primary and secondary language. English is number two, is higher ranked as Spanish. But if you look at secondary languages only, I don't think that many people realize that French is the number one secondary language. Mainly because of the North African states, where everybody speaks French. I'm too far away from the microphone. You told me before I shouldn't get too close. You can never please women. So, in terms of languages of the world, English is a very useful vehicle. And if you look at the psychological inertia, then although you can do it in French as well and you can do it in German as well, it is so much easier to understand and to read it quickly when you put it in English. Although it looks like garbage, yet it's easily understandable. Now, is English the official language? If we look at the English-speaking places in the world, there isn't that many. You know, of course, you get the United States or North America. You get Australia, and then pockets in Africa and in the Far East. And then, of course, you get a little country known as Great Britain, where most people speak some sort of an English. Well, now you said so many foreigners already, or at least they're arrested in England. Now, if we then look at the English of tomorrow, perhaps today, English today, it's also interesting to see that there are pockets of resistance, especially in the Latin-based countries. It's interesting to see when you go to Italy, when you go to France, how few people speak English. You could say, okay, the French are so big-headed. They say, okay, you come to France, then you better speak our own language, and the Italians do likewise. But there's also a degree of integration which is needed even in today's world. Tomorrow, the English of tomorrow, and that's basically the question: is there a future for tomorrow? It is clear that English has been degraded and regionalized over the years. The information technology, the communication technology, the social websites like Facebook, etc., don't really help because people communicate with very, very simple English. They manage, especially the young ones. When you look at the young ones, they do it with one hand and communicate in English. Because it's easy to learn, it's easy to communicate. It's not that sophisticated as if you have to speak in Italian or in French or in German or whatever. The use of Google is increasing in terms of language, but there again, the major use of Google is in spell checking. And why is it? Because the young people are horrible in terms of their spelling. They can't write properly. They can't speak properly, and because they can't speak properly, they can't write properly. And not only in English, that's also true in French or in German or in Italian. Typical example of how you communicate without really having to know the language. The future of the English language, and that I'll leave that one on for a little while because it will take you time to read through it. I can't read it for you, so you have to do it yourself. But there's a notion, don't know whether it has come into the English press, but there's a notion in the European community to go into the so-called Euro-English. And we'll go over five steps, and it will take time. But it will probably help the English police force to get quicker to what you need to have. So the question really is English going to be the future language? In terms of international negotiations, I would say no. English will not be the future language. The BRIC states, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, have so much power that they will no longer tolerate the English language as being the primary language. They will insist on their local language. It is also clear that the local content, including the language, will become more and more important. And when I look ahead and when I make comparisons of what's happening in the world, then I think despite what we've heard this morning. I think the language phenomenon, the penetration of a foreign language has to start at primary level. If you look at the small countries, and I'm coming from Switzerland, I live in Switzerland, we have 4 official languages. I would say about 80 to 90% of the Swiss people do speak at least two languages, one primary, one secondary. Most in the industrial world and the banking world will speak 3 or 4 languages. And that all starts because the first foreign language is already taught at primary level. And if you don't do that, there's no use in doing a language degree, because all you manage with your language degree is to order your food in the restaurant and have some casual conversation with local people. I'm also of a firm belief that if you start early, at primary level, at secondary level, and if you start early with international exchanges, if you get students to spend a few years or at least a year in a foreign country, they will learn the language, they will learn the habits, they will learn the culture. I've noticed that myself when I first came to England with just school English. I couldn't communicate because there's so much colloquialism in the language which you do not have when you study a foreign language in a foreign country. So the evolution of our English is like the evolution of man. I see that there are more women in the room, so please don't look at the lower bottom of that. Just look at the evolution of man, and I hope that's not the evolution of English. Thank you very much.